The forest floor beneath them was covered in names they didn't recognize. At first, nobody said anything. The four of them stood on the narrow stretch of earth between the tents and the treeline, staring down as the last gray light of evening slid between the branches above. The ground was damp from an afternoon drizzle, dark soil packed tight beneath scattered pine needles. But the needles didn't hide the writing. Names were scratched into the dirt. Hundreds of them, not carved into bark or painted on stones, just etched directly into the forest floor itself, shallow grooves dragging through the soil in long, uneven letters. "Okay," Mark finally said, exhaling through his nose. "That's weird." He nudged the dirt with the toe of his boot. The letters smudged slightly but held their shape. "Kids maybe," he added, though the place was hours from the nearest road. Lena crouched down, brushing away a layer of needles. More names appeared underneath. Alexander, Ruth, Marianne, Jose, Chris. They were written in different styles, some careful and straight, others jagged and rushed. "Campers," Ben suggested. "Campers don't scratch hundreds of names into the ground," Lena said. She stood, wiping damp soil from her hands. Her fingers smelled like iron and wet leaves. The clearing they'd chosen had looked normal when they arrived that afternoon. Flat ground, decent firewood, a small gap in the trees where sunlight reached through. They hadn't noticed the writing then. Or maybe it hadn't been visible. Jade shifted beside the tents, hugging her arms against the cold that had crept in with the falling light. "Did we walk over these earlier?" she asked. Nobody answered. The forest around them had gone strangely quiet. The afternoon chorus of insects had faded, leaving only the occasional creak of branches moving somewhere deeper in the trees. Mark knelt and traced one of the names. Peter. The groove wasn't cut cleanly like a knife mark. It looked dragged, as if someone had pressed something blunt into the soil and pulled it slowly through. "Look at the spacing," Lena murmured. They followed her gaze. The names weren't random. They formed loose rows across the clearing, spreading outward from the center like ripples in water. Ben frowned. "You think someone organized them?" "I think someone kept adding more," Lena said quietly. The wind shifted. A faint smell drifted through the clearing. Cold earth and something older, like damp stone sealed away for years. Jade stepped carefully between the markings. "Maybe it's some kind of memorial," she said. "Like hikers who—" She stopped. "Wait. What?" Mark asked. Jade pointed down. Her flashlight beam cut across the ground. A fresh name sat at the edge of the clearing, where the soil still looked newly disturbed. "Jason." Ben blinked. "That wasn't there before." Mark glanced at him. "You sure?" "Yes." They all stood still for a moment. The forest creaked again. Not wind this time. Something else. A soft shifting sound beneath the layers of needles and dirt. Lena turned slowly. "Did anyone bring a stick?" she asked. Mark handed her a tent peg. She knelt near the center of the clearing and gently scraped away the top layer of soil. The ground beneath was darker, damp, and covered in more names. Tighter now, stacked over each other. Eliza, Daniel, Marta, Will, Sophie. Some of them half erased by newer markings. "Okay," Ben said. "I officially hate this." The air had grown colder. Jade checked her phone out of habit. No signal. The battery icon flickered. "That's weird," she murmured. "What?" "It just dropped 10%. Mark stood and rubbed the back of his neck. "Let's just move the tents," he said. "Find another clearing." No one argued. They began packing quickly, the quiet efficiency of people who didn't want to admit they were unsettled. As Mark folded the rainfly, Jade stepped toward the edge of the clearing. Her flashlight beam drifted over the ground there. More names. But these were different. They weren't scratched. They were pressed deeper into the soil, as if the earth itself had sunk around them. Jade leaned closer. Her breath fogged in the cooling air. "Guys!" The others turned. "What now?" Ben said. Jade didn't answer immediately. Her flashlight trembled slightly. "Come look at this." They walked over. First, Mark didn't see it. Then the beam settled. 3 names sat in a row near the treeline. Fresh, the soil around them still loose and damp. Mark, Lena, Ben. No one spoke. The forest felt suddenly enormous. Jade swallowed. Where's mine? Ben turned slowly. You think that's funny? I didn't write them. Lena knelt, touching the edge of the lettering. The dirt was warm. Not from the sun. From beneath. Her hand jerked back. Something's moving, she whispered. Mark crouched beside her. The soil quivered slightly. A faint ripple passed through the surface of the clearing, subtle but undeniable, like the slow shifting of something buried deep underneath. Then the sound came again. A long, soft dragging noise. Not from the trees. From the ground. The names across the clearing began to distort. Lines deepened. Letters stretched. As if invisible fingers were pressing into the soil from below. Jade stepped backward. Mark. He didn't respond. He was staring at the 3 names. The grooves were widening. Slowly. Deliberately. Ben's voice dropped to a whisper. Why those 3? No one answered. A breeze passed through the clearing. The smell of damp earth grew stronger. And then Jade's flashlight beam shifted slightly. She froze. At the edge of the row, a new line was forming. The soil bulged upward. A shallow groove appeared. 1 letter. Then another. J. D. E. The ground settled. Her name lay beside the others. The forest was silent now. No insects. No wind. Just the quiet breathing of the 4 campers standing in the center of a clearing full of names. Lena's voice came out thin. We need to leave. But when they turned toward the trail, something was wrong. The narrow path they'd used earlier was gone. In its place, the forest floor stretched outward in every direction. And everywhere they looked, names, thousands of them, layered across the earth like overlapping footprints. Ben whispered, almost to himself. How many people came through here? Mark didn't answer. He was staring at the ground beneath his boots. Another name was forming. The soil shifted. Slow, patient, waiting. He stepped back. But the letters kept appearing. Not just near him. All around them. The clearing had begun filling with fresh grooves, spreading outward in expanding rings. Like space being made. Lena suddenly understood. These aren't memorials, she said quietly. Jade looked at her. Then what are they? Lena watched the ground breathe beneath the thin layer of pine needles. And for a moment, she thought she felt something vast turning slowly beneath the forest. Reservations, she whispered. The soil shifted again. Somewhere beneath the earth, something long and patient moved. And another name began to write itself. Their tent was pitched inside a clearing that hadn't existed the day before. Eli was the first to say it out loud. He stood just beyond the tent flap, hands tucked into the pockets of his fleece, looking across the open circle of ground with a tight, puzzled expression. That's not right, he said. Morgan was crouched beside the stove, coaxing a flame beneath a dented kettle. What isn't? This clearing. She glanced up. Soft gray dawn was filtering through the trees, the light thin and colorless after a night of fog. The forest beyond their campsite stood in quiet vertical rows, fir and cedar trunks damp with condensation. The clearing itself was almost perfectly round, 15, maybe 20 meters across. Flat ground, no underbrush, no fallen branches, just pale soil and short moss pressed down like something had ironed the earth smooth. Morgan frowned slightly. What about it? Eli rubbed his jaw. It wasn't here yesterday. Noah laughed from inside the tent. You're still half asleep. But Eli didn't smile. We hiked through here yesterday afternoon, he said, before we picked this spot. Morgan tried to picture it. The trail had been narrow and winding, cutting through thick ferns and fallen logs. They'd pushed through dense growth for almost an hour before finding this place. Or what they thought had been this place. Maybe you just didn't notice it, she said. Eli shook his head slowly. You would notice something this big. Noah crawled out of the tent, zipping his jacket as he stepped onto the moss. Cold air hung low in the clearing, colder than the forest around it. "Looks like a normal clearing to me," he said, but his voice had softened, because it didn't look normal. Not quite. Morgan noticed it too now. The trees around the clearing stood at equal distances from the center, their trunks forming a near-perfect circle. Their branches arched overhead but never crossed into the open space, like they had grown away from it, or been pushed back. The kettle began to hiss. Morgan poured 3 cups of coffee and handed them out. Steam curled upward into the pale morning air. "Maybe a storm knocked stuff down a while ago," she said. "Cleared it out." Noah gestured around. "There's no debris." He was right. Not a single broken branch. No exposed roots. Even the moss looked undisturbed. Eli walked slowly toward the edge of the clearing. Morgan watched him go. The air grew noticeably colder as he approached the tree line. He stopped a few steps from the trunks. "Come here," he said. They joined him. Up close, the edge of the clearing felt stranger. The moss ended abruptly at a thin ring of bare soil about a foot wide. Beyond that, the forest resumed normally, needles, ferns, fallen twigs. But the ring itself looked pressed, as if something heavy had rested there. Noah crouched and touched it. The dirt was firm and dry despite the damp forest. "That's weird," he said. Morgan stepped across the ring into the trees. The temperature rose immediately. Birdsong returned, faint but present. She looked back. The clearing behind them felt muffled somehow, as though sound couldn't quite settle inside it. "Listen," she said. Eli stepped beside her. "What?" "Nothing." He frowned. She gestured. "Exactly." The forest normally woke with noise at dawn. Chickadees, wind in the canopy, distant insects. But inside the clearing there was only stillness. Even their breathing seemed duller there. Noah stood and dusted his hands. "Okay," he said. "So it's a weird clearing." He shrugged. "Forests are weird." They finished their coffee and began packing slowly. But something about the place made them linger. The light inside the clearing looked different, brighter somehow. As the sun rose, beams of gold filtered through the trees, but none of them crossed the ring of bare soil. The light simply stopped there. Morgan noticed it first. "Look at the shadows." Eli followed her gaze. The tree shadows stretched inward but halted exactly at the edge of the clearing, like they'd hit an invisible wall. Noah stepped into the center and turned slowly. "Maybe it's just the angle." But his voice had grown quieter again. Morgan walked back toward the tent. Her footsteps sounded wrong. Muted. The soft crunch of moss barely reached her ears. She stopped. Behind her, Eli and Noah were talking, but their voices seemed farther away than they should have been, like hearing someone through a closed door. "Guys," she said. Neither of them responded. She turned. They were only 10 meters away. "Eli." This time he looked up. "What?" His voice reached her a moment later. Delayed. Morgan felt the back of her neck tighten. "That's not normal." Noah started toward her. Halfway across the clearing he stopped. "What the?" The trees behind him looked closer. Not by much, but enough. He turned around. The ring of bare soil had moved. Only a step, but it was definitely closer to him than before. "Did you see that?" he asked. Eli shook his head. "See what?" "The edge." Morgan walked quickly to Noah's side. The ring was now barely a meter behind him. "I thought it was farther back," she said. Eli studied the trees. "They're just trees." But he didn't sound convinced. They stood quietly for a while. Nothing happened. Wind moved through the distant canopy. Birdsong drifted faintly between the trunks. Morgan exhaled. "Okay, we're psyching ourselves out." She grabbed her pack and slung it over one shoulder. "Let's just get back on the trail." Noah nodded. "Good plan." They walked toward the side where the path should have been. The moss felt colder underfoot. The air grew still again. Morgan reached the edge of the clearing first. She stopped. "Eli." He joined her. The ring of bare soil was there. But beyond it, No trail. Just dense undergrowth and tightly packed trees. That's not right, he said. The trail had been wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Now there was nothing but ferns. Noah turned slowly. Maybe we came in from the other side. They tried that direction. Same result. Then another. And another. Every time they reached the edge, the forest beyond looked unfamiliar. Dense. Untouched. Morgan felt a slow chill settle into her chest. This clearing wasn't here yesterday, Eli said again. This time no one argued. They stood in the center of the circle. The silence had deepened. Even their movements felt heavier. Noah looked down. Guys! They followed his gaze. The moss beneath their feet had flattened in 3 faint paths leading outward, like trails worn by footsteps. But the paths ended at the ring. None of them crossed it. Eli crouched and ran his hand along one of the flattened lines. Felt smooth, compressed, like something had walked the same route over and over again. Morgan scanned the clearing. The moss was full of them now. Dozens of faint trails, all circling the interior. None leaving. The ring of bare soil shifted again. A slow, silent contraction. The trees crept closer. Noah's voice was barely audible. It's getting smaller. Eli stood slowly. How long were we asleep? Morgan looked at the rising sun. Seemed wrong. Higher than it should be. The light had changed from pale gold to hard white. Morning passing too quickly. Or not moving at all. The trees crept inward another step. The clearing tightened around them. And for the first time, Morgan noticed something else. The moss in the center wasn't just flattened. It was worn away. Exposed earth formed a shallow circle no wider than a fire pit. As if something had stood there for a very long time. The 3 of them were standing inside it now. Noah swallowed. What do we do? Eli didn't answer. He was staring at the ring of soil. It moved again. Just slightly, but enough. The circle closed tighter. The forest leaned inward. And the clearing that hadn't existed the day before continued, patiently, to disappear.